We shouldn't have to deal with any presidential candidates having secret communications with a foreign dictator who is hostile to the United States, who is trying to determine who we choose as our next president. That just shouldn't happen. But in the Trump era of Republican Party politics, this is now familiar. In the 2016 election, we know that the Russian government interfered in the election to help Trump. They hacked and leaked documents from his opponent's campaign. They mounted a big propaganda campaign, impersonating Americans, trying to mess with us, trying to turn the election toward Trump. We also know in 2016 that Trump's campaign chairman was, during the campaign, sharing proprietary non-public information from the Trump campaign with a Russian intelligence officer, while Russian intelligence was mounting that operation against us. Then 4 years later, it was the 2020 election, and we know that Russia once again interfered on behalf of Trump. That time, it was Trump's personal lawyer working with a sanctioned Kremlin agent to try to derail Joe Biden's campaign against Trump. Then now, 4 years later, happening again. Now in the 2024 election, we've got Russia seemingly doing more than they've ever done. They are straight up paying pro-Trump podcasters and media personalities. We've got Russia making deep fake videos about Kamala Harris supposedly hurting someone in a hit-and-run accident, and Tim Walz supposedly abusing one of his students. Both of those videos are completely fake, but both circulated very widely online, and both of them are now officially considered by U.S. intelligence agencies to have been created by Russia. We've got Russian military intelligence paying and directing an American expat to make fake American-seeming news websites and to produce conspiracy theory videos that have been promoted widely by pro-Trump personalities and media outlets. Now we've got the Director of National Intelligence coming out and saying the recent fake video of ballots cast for Trump supposedly being destroyed in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. That fake video, too, is an operation of the Russian government. All designed to help Trump and hurt Harris and make us not believe in our own democracy. In 2016, it was Trump's campaign chairman talking to Russian intelligence while they did their campaign to help Trump. 2020, it was Trump's lawyer talking to the Russians while they did their campaign to help Trump. Who's the contact person this time for the Trump campaign while Russia's doing it again? Cheaper to cut out the middleman. This time it's Trump himself talking to Putin, while Putin is mounting this big new effort to try to get Trump elected. Reported in Bob Woodward's most recent book, at least 7 times, have talked as many as 7 times since Trump left office as president. When asked if it was true, Trump said, quote, "I don't talk about that." Remarkable message discipline from him on this subject and only this subject. What else is he so, tight-lipped about? In addition to Trump, it's also, reportedly, Elon Musk, Trump's top funder and cheerleader, who has reportedly not only been talking secretly to Putin while Putin has been mounting this effort to try to get Trump elected, Musk specifically has also been talking to Putin's first deputy chief of staff. Why would he be talking to that guy specifically in the Russian government? I don't know, but he is the specific guy in the Russian government who's apparently in charge of operations targeting the American public. Like, say, for this election. The guy who orchestrated the whole fake news websites that look like American news outlets. That guy who's running that part of the pro-Trump Russian campaign operation is in frequent communication with Elon Musk now? While that campaign is underway? While Elon Musk has taken a leading role in the Trump campaign. That's who Elon Musk has been talking to while Russia's been doing this stuff. I wonder what they talk about when they talk. When the Republican candidate and his top funder are reportedly in frequent and secret communication with our country's most determined enemy, while that enemy is messing with us in our election to help the Republican campaign win. How do you play that wild card into this hand that we've been dealt? Might help to check in with somebody who knows how Russia works, who has personal experience with it. Victoria Nuland retired this year after more than 3 decades of government service. She retired as the number 3 ranking official at the U.S. State Department. In her time in government service, she also became a top target of Putin and Russia's intelligence agencies. Putin's regime bugged her cell phone. They leaked recordings of her calls with other diplomats in an attempt to undermine her relationship and America's relationship with our allies. Russian state media has consistently portrayed her as a kind of uber-powerful American boogeyman. They've blamed her, for example, for single-handedly causing the revolution that ousted Ukraine's pro-Putin president in 2013. That was 2013. They're still blaming her for that now. Victoria Nuland is an American government expert on Russian aggression. She also personally knows what it's like to experience it firsthand. Joining us now is Victoria Nuland, career diplomat, recently retired as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. Madam Ambassador, thank you very much for being here. I know that TV interviews aren't your favorite thing in the world.
Thank you, Rachel. It's great to be back with you and to talk about this issue as you and I did in 2016, as we did as well in 2020.
This is the third election in a row in which Russia has tried to interfere to try to get Trump into the White House. How do you assess the magnitude and the type of interference they're attempting this year compared to what they've done in his previous two elections?
Well, as you said earlier, Rachel, he's at it again. This time he's not even trying to hide his hand, and he has far more sophisticated tools. You know, his AI is better, so he can make these fake videos. He has done things like spend $10 million trying to buy American influencers and get them parroting his lines and not even know it's happening. But he's also got a brand new, very, very powerful tool, which is Elon Musk and X. You know, in 2020, the social media companies worked hard with the U.S. government to try to do content moderation, to try to catch this stuff as it was happening. But this time we have Elon Musk talking directly to the Kremlin and ensuring that every time the Russians put out something like this, it gets 5 million views on X before anybody can catch it. So it's quite dangerous. Although I do think the American electorate has gotten more sophisticated and more savvy about this stuff.
If an American citizen is talking to senior officials in the Russian government about anything, aren't they supposed to be reporting those contacts to the U.S. government? I mean, and if so, is that just a nice thing to do, like a patriotic thing to do, or are they required to do that?
It's not a legal requirement, but it obviously causes some suspicion and question about what Musk's motives are here, especially because Putin doesn't like it when he thinks we're interfering in his election, which we don't do, despite his views about that. But clearly, he's interfering in our election, and Musk is helping him. And Musk is also helping Trump. So now you have this triumvirate all on the same team. And Putin doesn't think it's important to try to look even with any semblance of even-handedness in this election. He knows what he wants. He wants Donald Trump elected.
I wanted to ask you about something else that was reported today in the New York Times, which is that, according to the Times' reporting, one of the ideas that's circulating in Trump's campaign is that if he's elected, they should get rid of FBI background checks for security clearances. That instead, the White House alone, or the White House maybe with a private company that they appoint for this purpose, should decide who gets security clearances without allowing the FBI to review, for example, people's past convictions, people's connections with foreign governments, people's susceptibility to blackmail or other reasons they might be denied a security clearance. That feels like a very risky move in any circumstance. Given the circumstance that we're just discussing right here, it seems almost insanely reckless. But I wanted to get your take on it.
Insanely reckless is the right way to put it, Rachel. That would mean that there would be no independent check on who anybody around Trump was talking to, might be influenced by, might be paid by, and it would put Putin, it would put Xi Jinping, it would put Kim Jong-un directly into the Situation Room and into Donald Trump's brain, and that's very, very dangerous. But equally dangerous, if I may, is what Trump is saying about what he would do inside the United States. that he would turn the U.S. police, that he would turn maybe the U.S. military against his enemies, that he would obviously use the courts to go after folks that oppose him. He is already suing members of the media, and that he would deny licenses to media organs that oppose him. Who does this sound like? It sounds like his friend Vladimir Putin. And the way Putin operates in Russia, and what Putin did to the tiny fledgling democracy that was starting to sprout in Russia. So Trump is also taking Putin lessons, as autocrats around the world are.
The idea of an American led by an admirer of Putin who puts the United States not as the leader of the free world, but rather into effectively a sort of axis with the dictator of Russia and the dictator in China and North Korea. And I mean, for the United States to be allied with those countries instead of our traditional alliances, I'm not sure people have absorbed the magnitude of what you're just describing there. But maybe we will.